American Comics. Venom Spider, starting from taking down Gwen. Chapter 1. Am I dead? Where is this? Quote. Ling Feng, who woke up again, looked at everything strange around him and fell into deep thought, and endless memories instantly flooded into his heart. I heard that the worst day of your life was when someone died, and for Peter, it was the day his uncle Ben died. What? Did I cross over? Peter. Could it be Spider-Man? Have I traveled to the Marvel world? Quote. In an instant, memories flooded in again, and he had been waiting for his uncle to come back from football practice to pick him up. When he was a kid, he loved sports, the feeling of free running, goals and finally pizza. It was the final, and Peter's team went all the way to the end, but Uncle Ben got sick. He knew it was important to take Peter with him anyway. He stayed in the car to keep warm, and as Peter and the team celebrated his victory, a carjacker pointed a gun at the window. Uncle Ben has always been a logical and practical person. He works with his hands, rebuilds and repairs cars. He has never been a person who can back down from problems. While he argued with the man, trying to convince him to go higher, the team was released and an agitated Peter rushed at him. Ben was worried about the boy, so he grabbed the gun, and the gun went off. As he lay in the parking lot of the sports center, he quietly died in the arms of another father during the game. He was a retired police officer, and while he tried his best to comfort him, some of his friends chased and caught the killer. For an 8-year-old, the funeral was surreal. He didn't know what to do or how, so he kept holding Aunt May's hand. She cried, and although there were blessed people there, no one remained to help after the vigil. She cried alone, and Peter didn't know what to do to make her feel better. To make matters worse, the carjacker did not go to jail. To the public defender, his defense was astonishingly strong, and he misrepresented the case enough and raised enough reasonable doubt that he was free to walk freely with a silly smug smile on his face. Hi kid. He yelled at the boy. No foul. When he complained, his lawyer booed him and pulled him away. It's a pain that you can't explain, an empty pain, like losing a part of yourself, when, in reality, there is nothing. Peter looked around, expecting his uncle to be there, and the pain would leave him breathless. He stared into space, trying not to cry as he struggled with the memory of that day. After that, his Aunt May was the only person in the world he could rely on. His parents died in a car accident when he was a baby and he will never remember them, so he was alone and they did their best. The life insurance payment was not much, forcing the little boy and his aunt to move back to a small apartment in the city center, within their budget. Even if Peter had to work 2 jobs and was exhausted most of the time, Auntie could guarantee that she never left. They may not have the best, but Peter knows that he has always been loved. Life was more like a routine than a big event, and at a laundromat and a local convenience store, the aunt got a job. When Peter changed schools, her meager salary supported him and tried her best to endure the pain. While Peter wasn't stupid, he could see that work was slowly killing her. She was only 40 years old, but the pressure in the shop and the poor quality safety equipment in the laundry made her age well beyond her age. He knew that she would never say anything, that she would rather endure pain than let him see hers, and he promised himself that one day he would make sure she never had to work again. Transferring schools was supposed to be a good thing, with new friends and new memories helping him cope with the grief of losing his uncle, but instead he lost his passion for sports. Its effects spread to Midtown High School, where Eugene Lightning Thompson suddenly uttered the words of wasting money going to the science club and decided to send Peter's life to hell. What started as a trifle, Peter soon discovers that his locker has been destroyed and one of his books has been lost and hidden where Peter can't go. It starts small, but when the boys reach puberty, it gets worse with the help of sports and various chemicals. What was once harmless and childish pranks became more evil. Peter would find his locker not only destroyed, but destroyed, his books torn or covered in water. Several times, when Eugene learned that Peter had no teacher around him, he even became more violent. There was no one at school to help him. Kid the Flash was too famous, too important to the school, and even as a high school football player, the sponsorship and publicity he brought to the school made him untouchable. What's more, he was wealthy, and his father gave a staggering amount of money to the school each year. Lightning was given a minor rebuke while glaring angrily at Peter. Everything they did made the situation worse, and from then on, Peter said nothing, silently enduring the humiliation and anger of Lightning in school. There were only two things in his life that would allow him to get a high school education. The first was a girl, Gwen Stacy. Her love of science and math, combined with her nonchalant attitude towards lightning and her beauty, meant that once she met Peter, they became friends. Gwen is just as smart as Peter, even though their talents come from different fields. He can see something, listen to its movements, listen to its sounds, find out what is wrong with it. Of course, this is training over the years, even if he is not always successful, to take things apart and put them back together. Gwen lay in the chemicals, she could see a formula on paper and know what it was, math was easy for them, and they made a connection between shared science and math clubs. Gwen knew that Peter wasn't just a friend, she liked him more, they shared a look, an intimate hug, and little things he felt were more special than anyone else's. But he also saw the way Lightning looked at her, the way everyone looked at her, and then the look they gave him. He was afraid not just of her refusal, but of what the school would do, and he didn't need a reason, but it gave everyone else a reason. As part of them, Felicia Hardy also left a place in Peter's life. She seemed to be increasingly interested in Gwen, but as they spent more and more time together, he found comfort in a familiar face. When the other person confronted him, it wasn't just him, but the rest of his team who knew she didn't care who his father was. Being the captain of the judo club also gave her a sense of threat, which meant that Lightning and the others stayed away from her, and in turn away from Peter. There was one last man in Peter's life. Harry Osborn, unfortunately, the son of the second richest man in the beautiful country, failed to follow in his father's footsteps. His intelligence and his motivation are lacking, thanks to Peter, the brightest boy in school to help him. His mother died of a rare, incurable genetic disease, and she hoped Harry would receive a more basic education. His relationship with his father was strained, and doing anything that made him angry was a good thing in Harry's book. When Harry's grades returned to below average, he would tip Peter to earn a small sum of money to help him escape easily. Norman never really accepted the boy, and his background was to offend the billionaire, but Harry and Peter ignored him, a rare act of provocation by Harry. Peter kept his secrets, even an old childhood friend, M.J. Watson, and Peter kept his distance. Time, embarrassment, and a strong warning from Lightning made him realize that they were now living separately. They share classes, share friends, but never reconnect in a meaningful way. Peter was polite to most of his classmates, but distant. Each of them had some kind of connection with Flying Man, and each of them looked at him with disgust or pity, enduring rumors and stories that made Peter's life worse than he could have imagined, not only through Flying Man, but also those cronies. The years spent in the city center slowly grew and Peter, a lovely 8-year-old, found himself in his 18-year-old adolescence. This is his final year at Downtown High School, and academically, he will graduate with a first degree in mechanical and electrical engineering from New York University, covering all of his expenses on a full scholarship. Everything is on track. He has an educational program, he has an internship program with a hammer technology. Harry was the son of Norman Osborn, and he even offered to arrange an internship there for him, but Peter refused. It's not that Gwen doesn't like Peter, but because he's afraid the Lightning will be there. He had warned him a few times to talk to her as if they were friends, and Peter knew that if Lightning found him, he would either lose his place and continue to be bullied. It's Peter's escape from hell for the past 4 years, and even if Lightning doesn't have the most dazzling reputation, it's still one of the big three. Stark Enterprises was his first choice, but no one can get an internship at Stark unless you already have a large number of certificates. And the OS company was the domain of flash memory, and what was left to him was the hammer, and when he was admitted, he was ecstatic. In Peter's eyes, Justin Hammer is more of a performer, but he still has a military contract, there's a lot of media coverage, and it's still a huge deal for Peter. He has just celebrated his 18th birthday, the cold winter is coming to an end, Christmas and New Year are coming to an end, and he only has 6 months left to study. Exams and year-end prom, and once he plucked up his courage, he would ask Gwen if she wanted to go with him. Last week, when she said happy birthday, she quickly slapped him on the cheek and ran to hide next to Felicia. She seemed angry, just as Peter seemed happy to do so. He had proof that she liked him, he intended to do so, he had even begun to look at the flowers, and probably the aunt began to make fun of him mercilessly. Even if Flyer ensures that his days at school are miserable, he is able to return to a safe and welcoming home. Life is good, maybe better, Peter knows it's possible, but he's still happy, he just wants Uncle Ben to be proud of him. He stared at the permit in his hand. Aunt May had already signed it, and when he handed it to the guards, they scanned it quickly and returned it. Peter Parker, 18. Senior Year Photography Project. Document and film the work schedule of Oz. It was printed on the guest pass and cut to a rope and hung around his neck. Peter and the others stood and waited, quickly photographing the building. He had already got an Oz camera and had to return it at the end of the tour. Once they searched and confirmed that he hadn't taken any secret photos, they were downloaded to a memory card and sent to the school. At Oz, Harry told Peter about the place several times, and Harry's father, Norman, had promised to let Peter visit. This time, with his school pass in hand and a camera strapped around his neck, he saw the busy lab, where the heart of Oz was beating. Of course, Peter had to follow Gwen and joke about nerds like those sycophants and horseshitters, but he didn't care. Gwen has been detained here for a year, and she's smart. Peter often wondered if it was part of his imagination for him, his friendship with the school's three most popular girls. MJ, Gwen, and his co-chair in the math group, Felicia. It's tough to watch someone stupider than a pet stone. Peter would have liked a good job in life, but he couldn't, and he wouldn't feel sorry for himself. He did best in class, even better than Gwen, and even though Harry said a lot of hot things, Peter knew he wanted him to be with his dad. When the first part of the tour was over, they headed downstairs to the food store. The rest of the football team, not interested in science, sat at the table, laughed at passers-by, and even they recognized the boss's son and stayed away from them. Peter was enjoying his lunch, a bottle of apple juice and a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and he was stunned when he felt the splash and heard laughter. Lightning opened a soda bottle at him and shouted, "Oh!" As he and his cronies laughed, Peter was drenched. Peter poured the black sticky liquid out of his lunchbox and wiped himself clean as best he could. He scolded into the mirror in the bathroom, knowing that there were only 6 months left before he was free. He planned his life after school, and although he had to intern at the Hammer Company to avoid him, Flying Man was not a part of it. He had no hope at Stark Industries. People from all over the world gave up high-paying jobs just to work there, and a high school student had no chance. When he washed the soda in his clothes and washed his face, he never noticed a strange spider above his head crawling down from the ceiling. When he straightened up, he felt something in the back of his neck, and when he raised a hand to find out what it was, he felt a sharp pain. A sudden electric shock hit his body and he gasped to find that his legs had become weak and all sensations had disappeared from his hands. He struggled to stand, and he reached out weakly to the door, hoping that someone could hear him trying to call for help. He struggled weakly when he felt someone pull his clothes. He was sure someone was saying his name over and over again, but he couldn't concentrate, everything was so bright and noisy. He must have had someone taken his things and rummaged through his clothes. He felt something wet splashing on him and didn't even record that he was sick. Get him out. If Osborn sees him, we're finished. Peter felt the rough hands of several people lift him up, followed by a bright glow from outside. He was lifted up and thrown into the trash can at the back of the building, and Peter, with his eyes half open, struggled to get up and began to walk down the street. He fell several times, and when he found that his body was unresponsive, he gasped and groaned. He knew there were many people around him, and he could hear the heavy clap of their footsteps, his tongue numb as he tried to shout for help, his voice slurred. Hey, kid. Peter's mind was still tingling, nausea and cramping, making his body tense and bent. He went too far to answer. Pain, nausea, bright light all attacked his senses. No matter where he was, the smell was terrible. Yes, he was a liar, caught him in along with everyone else. A cold liquid seemed to rush into his veins, bringing comfort to the nausea and pain of this world. Peter wished someone would find him and take him for help, not one of the various gangs he had heard of who took children off the street to sell. Peter was pressed against a table with his hand and he tried to fight back. Something inside him told him that it was wrong and that he needed to escape. But when he tried to move, his muscles screamed at him. His skin felt stiff, and every cell in his body was like a sharp knife against his skin. Every breath filled his lungs with her tiresome scent, and he could smell her fragrance, not perfume. She was so excited that she could almost feel a thick taste on his tongue. Peter knew that all his senses had gone crazy, even the sounds he heard were distorted. As if it were an underwater sound, or a high-pitched scream. The lights in the room burned like stars, and he had to close his eyes and even see the streaks that lit up as he was pushed somewhere. The smell of disinfectant ran through both nostrils, and he hoped it was a hospital. He felt a sharp thorn in his arm and the world became dark again. Okay. Test subject 15 Gamma, alien subject Sigma. The adhesion test is performed within 5 minutes. 4.3.2 and 1. They took the boy away, stripped him from his stinking clothes, sterilized him and checked him for serious illness. This process worked better in subjects who took less anesthesia and, although chaotic, looked younger and healthier than most. Poor fools, the technician wants to tie him to a table, doesn't look like a 20-year-old. The nameless technician turned on a switch and watched the glass-reinforced box open. The subject instinctively crawled towards the unconscious boy, like a pudding, flowing on the smooth panel of the design, which, once activated, allowed it to be safely caught. Various types of cameras and scanners have documented the interactions between boys and aliens, hoping to unlock the secrets of this connection, hoping to eventually report the successful fusion of symbiotes and humans. The foreigner was under the robe, and finally covered the little boy's scrawny body. It begins by attaching tiny tendrils to his brain and nervous system and attaching itself to a host granted in a symbiotic relationship. The boy's eyes twinkled as it began the joining process. The technician studied various screens and recorded the boy's heart rate, nerve activity, and body temperature. All of this will rise dramatically when aliens try to take control, if the connection is successful. So far, all the connections have killed the host, and their heart rate reaches 200 bpm. It will be trial number 64, and all homeless men, women, and now a teenager will die. The symbiote stopped, something was wrong, something pulled it out of its natural place, dragged it into its cells, and crushed and broken down its own body. A chemical reaction begins in Peter's cells, his DNA has broken down and is being modified, and when the alien symbiote tries to hide and fuse into his body, the chemical reaction spreads to it. Its DNA is being broken down and transformed into an organism along with the boy, host and symbiont. The symbiote screams in pain as it is digested by this enzyme, struggling to remain intact, looking for a place to hide inside its new host, but nowhere else. It began injecting a toxic chemical into the host, hoping to kill them before it could kill them. As long as it is alive, they will survive to take revenge. That's when the chemical is absorbed, altered, and screams in pain when its toxins begin to affect its own cells. As the monitor reacted to this development, the technician watched boredly. His heart rate was almost at critical levels, and the child was unlikely to survive. Often, the symbiote would begin to separate from the host, leaving a now dead pile of meat for him and his colleagues to dissect and figure out what went wrong. This time, when aliens seemed to flood into the boy's body, he watched with rapt attention. He began to spasm, the skinny child's body seemed to bulge, and something was twisting under the skin. The technician frowned. Did that alien want to eat that boy? It was new, and most of the time, they either tried to join the human body or melt the body, which he had never seen such an addition, and when he checked the monitor, he watched in amazement. He had seen before this, and if the body was too badly drugged, the creature would kill the host instead of trying to join. The worst animals just melt as symbionts flow over them, as if they were offended by the contaminated meat provided. He had seen too many people who didn't want to be disturbed, which only meant he needed a bucket to clean the room, rather than doing autopsies and doing paperwork as usual. Does it want fresher meat that is younger than before? Reach for his walkie-talkie. Madam, this time is different, aliens seem to be reacting to young bodies. After a short pause. Monitor closely and report as soon as the procedure is completed. Making sure every camera was on, making sure every device had a complete recording, the nameless technician watched in amazement as the boy's heart rate began to slow down. Then his brainwave activity returned to normal, and finally, the epilepsy or everything that happened was over. Unlike before, even the training video they watched when they first successfully entered was completely different. The symbiote was absorbed by the boy instead of being covered by the surface of the skin hidden inside. The thermal camera found that this symbiote had fully integrated into the boy's body, and his now tight thin muscles were shimmering with sweat, as if exercising. The technician shook his head, and then he needed to go to bed. Young man, but the boy was a stranger. Turning around, his hand was only a few inches away from the walkie-talkie as the sound of the glass crashing made him jump into his chair. Turning around, he saw the boy standing there, staring at him, his eyes as black as asphalt. He retracted his punch and poked his arm out of the shattered glass, shattering them all. The technician let out a suffocating scream for a moment as the creature grabbed him with a black paw. "We are Venom." When Peter woke up, he realized how much pain he had. Every muscle seemed to be extremely painful, and his mouth was filled with the faint taste of strange metal. He groaned, slowly lifted himself out of bed, and stopped, when he saw himself standing in the mirror on the wall. Moving the dirty laundry to the floor, he stared at himself in amazement. He's skinny, yes. But now his muscles were undulating under his pale skin, as if he had spent hours in the gym instead of the library. He raised a hand above his head, he wasn't sure, but he could be taller. Peter shook his head, it was impossible, hell, even the muscles he saw were impossible, and the more he stared at the strange reflection in the mirror, the more he felt like he was dreaming. He looked at the jam, he and May hadn't measured him in a while, but as he stood next to the marker, he saw that his normal 58 was now close to 5'11". He cursed, not quite fit the 6-foot standard, but the extra height was different, especially when he stood tall and not listless. He rubbed his hands against his still unkempt hair, still a normal light brown and still hanging loosely in front of his eyes. Aunt May kept threatening him with scissors, but he kind of liked it. It hides his eyes and some of his expressions, and when he lowers his head, it is a small shield that he can hide behind. No matter what his aunt said, he knew he was that eccentric handsome. As he gazed at his reflection, the once pale thin boy seemed to turn into a strong man. He even felt his underwear tighten as he went from side to side, trying to stretch his arms and legs. When he stared at them, well, this is definitely new, he thought. He shook his head and ignored it, at least for now. He went back to looking in the mirror. He tried to do a few exercises like those sports athletes, posing to attract himself, but his muscles stiffened and screamed at him. He'll figure it out, but first, he needs to eat something, or eat a banana. Muscle stiffness means two things, either he has been exercising or it is more likely that whatever happened to him yesterday made his muscles firm. Slowly descending the stairs, he noticed Aunt May sitting at the breakfast table with a sad look on her face. He slowly put himself in his chair and picked up some fruit and cereal. "How?" his aunt said first. "Oh, thank you for making me breakfast, Aunt May. I don't know what's going on, I think I'm going to eat something." She leaned back in her chair. "Thank you, you want to say thank you. You come home at 3 a.m., yell at your uncle, smash a chair, drop furniture, and pass out, and you say thank you." She stood up and walked around behind the chair, waving her arms as she spoke. "What the? No, Aunt May, no, I got sick at Oz. I think I threw up, and then I came home, and you didn't come to pick me up, did you?" Peter looked guilty. 3 a.m. He thought, what's going on? "You're sick, aren't you?" "Yes, Aunt May, I was sick, I threw up, I think someone took my clothes." Peter sat up straight. "My wallet and camera, oh man, they took my clothes." Peter walked back lazily. When he woke up, there was no trace of his clothes, bag, or camera. The camera is from Oz, so he doesn't care much, it's a waiver he signed, and if he loses it, he'll have to pay for it. He always wanted to be a photographer, but he discovered a passion for mechanics and electronics that he never had time to photograph. Usually this was just for fun, but someone somehow discovered this and volunteered to let him film the field trip of the Oz company, thinking it was fun. The Aunt May pointed a finger at him. "You, be quiet, sit there." She reached over and took the phone off the charger. "Yes, Midtown High School, I need to speak to the head of the class trip to Oz yesterday, student Peter Parker. ID 1,469,902. I'm his aunt." She walked around. "Yes. So Peter didn't come back last night, and I heard he was sick, yes, You left him in Oz, what are you thinking? Leave a student alone to me." Aunt May was silent on the phone. "Yes, well, I will. Before hanging up. Ah, Aunt May. Peter looked up from the cereal. He had seen her angry before, and whenever Peter came home with a torn book, or dressed in torn clothes, she would frown, trying not to make her yell. Peter didn't know her exact age, but he knew that the wrinkles and calluses on her hands were caused by working too hard, and the wrinkles and small gray hair were due to stress. She was a very attractive woman, just like her classmates often laughed at him. Although thin, but not thin, her demeanor is like a tiger, and her attitude is very similar. The aunt, a few inches taller than Peter and of modest stature, knew that her social life had been hanging in the balance, not because of loyalty to his uncle, but loyalty to Peter. She spent her time and energy making sure Peter's life was as good as possible, and the more Peter loved her. You don't go to school this week, you don't even call on the phone, you don't have social media, what do you want to do? Peter lowered his head and just nodded. Then the buzzer on the door rang, and Peter looked up and looked at him. Reclining in his chair, Peter knew to be quiet when Aunt May was angry. Maybe it wasn't him, her anger didn't know who it was directed at, but the fire didn't care who burned it, he knew that Aunt May was the fire now. He tilted his head slightly, and could hear the sound of the doorway, as if he were sitting next to them. Mr. Osborne, are these documents meant to make sure we don't prosecute you for leaving an 18-year-old kid behind for how he got home in a taxi alone in your facility? Aunt May was angry that the school had not only left him there, now Norman was also taking advantage of his son's friendship with Peter to try to get rid of any possible burden. I can sue, any lawyer will take this test without pay, and if there is any result, you know that you will transfuse the blood test results. Peter panicked. Whatever happened to him, it could have been something that happened at Oz. But it will be tested after there is no freedom, especially if this is an experimental drug. While he was very curious about what happened to him, he preferred to stay away from labs and any government research institutions. Mrs. Parker, this is a formality. Norman is a man of good manners who has been taking money from gullible investors for years, which has made him his own king. Harry was worried about Peter's sudden illness, and his friend Gwen collected his things. While I believe the taxi accident was a mistake, we can settle it through the courts without dragging it, can't we, Peter? Peter jumped up from his chair. Mr. Osborne, can I see? Peter bypasses Aunt May and takes the agreement from Norman. It's standard stuff, but hidden in the small print are several liability clauses that basically prohibit Peter or any descendant from suing Oz, Norman, or any of his descendants forever. Sir, this can be very bad. If it gets leaked, even if it's just a stomach problem, your insurance liability alone will cost you millions of dollars. $2.5 million in damages. I will sign this agreement. If asked, this has never happened. Peter was shaking, he wanted to blackmail Norman Osborne. Norman Osborne is not the person you usually bargain for, he is used not only to his own way, but to getting whatever he wants. He never approved of Harry dealing with public school children, but his late wife had made him promise to work hard to limit his education, and he agreed. He snorted. Sign today. 250, I'll sign today. Norman reached for his jacket, took out his checkbook, signed his name, and tore out the check he had just written. Signature. Peter picked up a pen from the telephone hanging on the wall, signed his name next to each cross, a total of 6 times, then took the check from Norman and handed him the paper. Norman snorted and walked away without saying anything. Peter was right, if a student was poisoned there, the insurance alone would be in the millions. The escaping lab animals were all caught, so contamination wasn't a problem, but even after testing each student's blood, they couldn't be 100% sure they hadn't been bitten. Even this will lead to lawsuits, and the medical procedure for underage children is bad enough, but whoever it is, there is a price to pay. 5 years ago, he personally made sure that all these freaks were caught and killed. After so many deaths, he won't let this happen again. He clenched his fists angrily, thinking how bad it would be no matter what idiot did it. He personally fired the mutes who tied them up in a taxi and sent them home, and now he'll find someone to fix that. To make matters worse, these spiders should have been destroyed years ago, and someone messed up and he would find out who it was. Of course, he had to use his own $2.5 million in order to hide the proceeds, so he was naturally angry and he would also vent it on Harry. It was his lack of intelligence that made him friends with the children of the Parker family, whom Norman knew before the death of his parents and whose talents were passed on to him. If Harry had only a fraction of his intelligence, he wouldn't be friends with losers like Parker, so he wouldn't be able to copy homework and get help on exams. Peter closed the door, turned his back to the door, and sighed. Sorry, Auntie, but Norman can be firm. If we don't, Harry will be in trouble and he'll make sure he gets what he wants. You know, at least his way we get some money. He smiled at her, hoping she wouldn't be to him. When Norman showed up, she looked like she had been 100 years old, and Peter knew they could fight and maybe win a bigger reconciliation, but it would ruin Aunt May's health. He also had to endure medical treatment, which could be a disaster. When she and Uncle Ben started living with them, she wasn't that old and even Peter had a hard time raising her. Her brown hair was a mess, and although it was neat, Peter knew that the chemicals in the laundry did not do her hair, skin or lungs any good. Aunt May was old before she went there, and Peter hated himself for not being able to help her. It's his fault. Uncle Ben is dead, it's his fault. Aunt May has to be working all the time. Now that he had the money, there was a way to pull himself and her out of this place. Even with Norman's frowning face, Peter didn't care. He has capital, a good mind and, most importantly, a person who loves him. Still, he had to figure out what was really going on with Oz. A new body is great, but memory loss and ranting at an aunt can be symptoms of a bigger problem. Peter needs to figure out what's really going on, which means staying away from prying eyes. If anyone finds out, especially Oz, he could be spotted on a series of slides that have been carefully categorized for study. Sitting on the floor next to him. Are you sure, Pete? Because it's not me who handles it. I mean, I'll help spend that money. But if those fools did something, you'd be in trouble. Peter just smiled and rested his head on Aunt May's shoulder. I don't know, Aunt May, I think, I'll be fine. With the Oz company quiet, Peter decided to keep a low profile for the time being. Whatever happened to him, he needed to check it out and sneak out to find a quiet place, which seemed like the best option. Aunt May visited him every few hours after he became ill, although he appreciated that this worry would affect his examinations. To make sure he didn't get sick again, and to make sure everything was settled, Aunt May gave him a week off from school. She met with the principal and the school board, and even though Peter was no longer a child, it was unacceptable to leave a sick student. Peter shook his head and the problem was solved. Oz knew Peter is an academic student, not one of the rookies in football. Whoever decided to keep him there would receive a slap in the face, perhaps leaving a note in their records, but Peter suspected that something more would happen. He was a small fish in a small pond, surrounded by sharks. Until then, he had a week to figure out what was really going on. The figure in the mirror is still him, not short, not cute, but now, he has muscles. He knew he would never have done it without months of hard work and strict exercise and eating habits. Whatever made him sick at Oz, it also changed him. Did something escape from the lab? Does he have super cancer? Peter began to breathe. Super cancer? Question mark, question mark, question mark. He knew that Oz studied many different infectious diseases. Peter, think for yourself. Cancer doesn't give you abs, he thought, but what next? Question mark. Studying himself in the mirror, Peter made the same poses he had seen with other more famous bodybuilders. Until he realized that posing in the mirror was not only pointless, but also seemed a bit silly. He didn't become a big, muscular man, his body was soft, Peter, built for speed, not strength. Shaking her head, maybe Gwen wanted to see the new arrival, maybe if he gave her a little Pete's gift, she would prefer to go to the year-end dance with him. Laughing at his own stupid joke, he decided to come out. The tension of the muscles is great, but the strength of the muscles is king. He put on some loose clothes and hoodies and shouted at Aunt May. Go out for a while, need fresh air, love you. Then head to the wilder part of Brooklyn and find an empty place with no difficulty. A local party animal made the mistake of taking what he thought was an abandoned warehouse that was actually a meth lab. A few shots and a few dead partygoers, which later turned into a week of shootings. While the tape was still there had been no police or underworld in the building for some time. The just affixed sale sign shows that evidence collection is over and real estate agents are trying to sell the building to poor recipients. Of course, Peter knew he got money from Oz, and maybe this was his chance to get a building that would really fulfill his first dream. He thought about it for a while in his head, remembering to go to the town hall and register a company that was just starting out. Working for Oz was great, but he knew that even if they stopped talking, he would always be in Harry's shadow. He tutors the son of the boss of the company, and he will follow him like a stench. He will be constantly watched and will have to face nepotism. Maybe it's a better idea for him to build his own company. Small and manageable tech companies are all the rage. If he has some connections, he can achieve it. Lifting the yellow police tape, Peter walked to the side door, still swinging freely where the police slammed the door open. It was a mess inside. The floor was stained with blood, industrial cleaners only turned it into brown smudges, and the strong smell of industrial bleach and solvents hung over the air. The drug plant itself has been cleaned up. Electricity and water equipment hangs on empty walls, and their cooking station seems to be still there. 4 empty containers reserved laboratories and stout bunk beds for the workers, either cooking here, or just being too lazy. While evidence collectors will take anything related to drugs, cleanup crews will take anything of value or nothing that is too dirty. But the warehouse is still full of discarded counters, tables and other household items. Pallets and other fragments were scattered on the floor. Bullet holes were everywhere, although the cartridge casings were gone, and it was clear from the chaos here what was happening here. While measuring the 1,000 square meter building, Peter suddenly noticed that the laboratory, the manufacturing room, the server room, and even a small house where he lived while working were floating in his mind. The portable office is crammed into the corner, creating a stark contrast to other garbage thrown in the warehouse. The deal was definitely made there, relatively without blood or bullet holes, and they probably only got kitchenware, not dealers or main bosses. The building is sound, with no running water or electricity, but the doors and windows are functional. The first thing Peter did was lock them all with a hidden lock. This was his hiding place, and the last thing he wanted was for a group of intruders to take over it while he was in school. He sprinkled a little water and installed a new lock on the side door, making sure it looked stuck and not locked. Twist the frame slightly to make it look like you've been knocked out of the way and get stuck, and make sure that both entrances to each other are locked from the inside. Now there is only one way to get in and out, and he only has one key. Peter walked into the portable office, which was clean, and he guessed that even drug dealers had standards, no matter who the drug dealers did drug dealings with. He put his bag away, took off his hoodie, and began to think about how he could test what Oz had done to him. There were plenty of sidewalks where he could run to windows, there were stairs that he could use to pull up, and his excitement increased as he scoured his phone for daily activities. For a whole week, Peter did nothing but go to the warehouse to test himself. From childhood to childhood, he picked up pallets, wooden boxes, furniture and anything he could get his hands on, and finally, he came to the portable office. He gently lifted it to one end and found that he himself did not feel nervous even though it lifted a few feet off the ground. Peter put it down and stared at his hand. The stiff edge of the office didn't even leave any marks on his skin, let alone cut him. Looking at the container, Peter had a smile on his face and was quickly proven right. He lifted a hand and raised its edge above his head. He grimaced a little as the garbage inside moved and fell to one end. Next, he practices his agility, climbing scaffolding and jumping from beam to beam. The walkway leading to the large window gave him a suitable climbing frame, and he easily swayed between sturdy welded brackets and tumbled from one side of the building to the other. He was completely lost in the direction of time, and even the light from the window did not notice the boy's cheerful jump from beam to beam. It wasn't until there was a noise at the gate that a security guard must have heard his screams and shouts that Peter lost his concentration and lost his hand. When he fell, time seemed to slow down, and the warehouse was not so large at 10 meters high, it was enough to fall, he either hit his head on the ground or crippled himself. When he fell, reaching for anything, he felt a strange sensation and a white thread pulled out of his wrist, buckled the rope, and tied himself to a sidewalk across from him. Pulling on his lifeline, he was pulled by its elasticity under the iron fence, where he found himself stuck, not by the line he shot out, but by his fingers sticking like a worm. A flashlight shot into the warehouse, but since Peter was currently a few meters in the air, in a dark warehouse, glued to the bottom of the walkway, the guards could not see anything. Peter has assured that even after cleaning up the place he left behind will be chaotic and his presence will be ignored. When the guard left, Peter breathed a sigh of relief, hung down, and grabbed the walkway with his fingers, but he didn't feel nervous in either his arms or fingers. He lifted himself as if doing pull-ups, and found that unless he pulled his hand hard off the stuck steel frame, each hand could support his weight. It takes a conscious effort to take his hand away and test a hand to quickly discover that he is in the time he wants to, not at all times. Unwilling to commit suicide by repeatedly falling down, Peter stood on the ground and stared intently at the bottom of the sidewalk. He raised his arm and extended his wrist to the muscle, and he froze. He knew it wasn't an accident. No matter what he did, a sticky line would come out of his wrist, which could have happened in a panic, but he was sure he should be able to repeat it. While examining his wrists and forearms, he felt a dense knot in his muscles and a long tube reaching out to the wrinkles on his wrists, where the veins protruded. He tugged at the skin with his fingers, and when he pressed and stimulated, a thick stream of liquid spurted out. When he looked closer, he could see that there were several small holes in his skin, which were too small to be seen, but when he pressed them in the right place, they became liquid. Like a spider. Peter thought to himself. The liquid is more like a sticky mass, sticky, fibrous, gathered together and is disassembled like a net. Maybe a spider bit me, Peter thought as he stared into the sky. He looked up with a frown and stared at the walkway he had fallen, and the line he had shot earlier was gone. Taking out his phone, he checked the time, and after a few minutes, the white webbing seemed to dissolve into some kind of light, airy foam before it completely dissolved. After muscle training, Peter spent some time testing his net ability, tensile strength, mesh thickness and duration, even though it was strong enough to make solid objects. Sadly, while he can make the net thicker or thinner, the most he can do is make a small ball that is soft, can splash like gel, and can be hard like a rubber ball. But he found that by increasing or lowering the pressure on his arm, he was able to make the net last longer, like a rope that stayed for hours, or turn into a foamy spray that evaporated after a few seconds. He was disappointed that he couldn't make a bat or a shield, but being able to make bullets himself was great. No need to be greedy, Peter thought to himself, superpowers are enough. Fascinated by the latest discoveries, Peter made it his mission to explore the limits of his new abilities. At this time, a smile appeared on his face, and he said to himself with a smile. Lightning. He thought, let's see how he does it. With a smile on Peter's face at the thought of taking revenge on Flying Man, he looked around the warehouse and began to have a plan in his heart. It was a good day for Peter. He did nothing but test the limits of his new strength, and he found that he was not only strong but also strong. He slipped down a walkway and was surprised to find that he was not injured. At the risk of jumping higher and higher, he hit the concrete floor of the warehouse until he jumped off the roof. Of course it hurt, but only a bruise was left and the next day it was gone. He even decided to buy the warehouse, and an iron-eyed real estate agent looked at him as if he were joking. Finally phoned from her office to his bank to convince her that he meant it. As if someone wants to spend an afternoon listening to someone else chatter about warehouse insurance, life insurance, and then fill out several forms, all in order to deceive a boring real estate agent. They haggled over the price, and the original request was $250,000, including any taxes he would pay. Peter argues over the mess in the warehouse, and with current history, his price drops by $50,000. The paperwork takes 2 weeks to complete, and once he has it, he gets the keys. The whole internal mess was his responsibility. Any problems occurred after the sale was completed and had nothing to do with the real estate agent, who signed most of his paperwork. After he left, the real estate agent secretly drank a bottle of wine. The only thing that spoiled his good mood was going back to school, which was his last and hardest year. He had the highest grades in all courses, but sports were his weakness. Even Gwen reluctantly admits that she doesn't have his ingenuity and hard work. But even so, he had a problem, and before he appeared, he discovered a smell of cologne. Hi Parker. Flying Man shouts that his lack of intelligence makes his naming abilities richer. Oh hey, Flush. In a flash. What did you call me? He yelled at Parker. Lightning, you know, what everyone calls you from the first year. Peter smirked and said that the suffocating stench emitted by lightning, considered expensive cologne, hid some different chemical smells for Peter's enhanced senses. Maybe there's nothing heavier than steroids, but the flying man is definitely doping. Yes, you better keep that in mind. Having determined that no teacher was present, Flying Man strode towards Peter, ready to punch Parker in the body when he suddenly moved. He felt his feet go and he hit his head against the painted steel locker door. He's sure Parker didn't do anything, but it felt as if someone had tripped him up, so Parker was willing to pay the price whether he had it or not. Feeling a lump on his head, he roared again, reaching for Parker, only to find his wrist gripping something that felt like iron. Parker pulled him closer. Lightning thought he had been knocked into the locker again. Parker physically caught him, and Parker, who fell backwards, slipped on the floor. Everyone turned around to see if it was lightning that hit Peter enough to make him fly. Mr. Thompson, enough is enough. Peter and Flyer's homeroom teacher, Ms. Monroe, have seen the quarrel even though she is well aware of their history. But even if she wanted to interfere, she couldn't. Fixia's father donates several huge sums of money to the school and the football team every year, and if she causes Fixia trouble, she will be eliminated. Strangely, Flying Man looks confused. He hit Peter, so why does he look like the injured party? Even Ms. Monroe expressed her displeasure with the two. She used to be a witness to their quarrels. Peter always came out of the loser. What is the difference now? She looked at him, and he blushed. If he had a teacher, it was her. She is a tall African woman with a little accent. Her dark chocolate skin and long white hair were always perfectly wrapped in a suit. She was serious but empathetic and gave Peter any advice she could. She exudes authority, and even Fixia knows not to argue with her too much, as if she is a force of nature and not a simple instructor. Gwen showed up and helped Peter stand up. Gwen is one of the only people Flying Man knows who won't get into trouble. Even though his father was a board member of the OS company, even though they earned more than most schools combined. But his wrist still hurts, and Parker grabs where he goes, and the body bumps his chest hurt. Peter smiled at Gwen. He could smell her fragrance, still staring at her as he tried his best to stop the blood flowing back. Gwen was a little shorter than him, and she liked to have her hair fluffy and cut into mushroom-like hair. When the hair fluttered around her neck, Peter knew it was natural, and even under the bad school lights, it looked like blue silk. Peter had seen her in a summer dress, and when he knew she was slim, he ran to dance ballet. Her legs are thin and her chest is romantic. This is not to say that Peter looks too obvious, but to look at him too obviously. Just as three people were standing in the hallway of the school. Don't bother Peter, go to the classroom. Looking at the normal bystanders around, his cronies, he never remembered their names. A school in New York has a big program to see if kids with special needs can attend regular school, at least half day. They were a couple, a cute but somewhat silly redhead and a weird kid with strange red glasses, staring at them along with the others. The red-haired girl shook her head almost imperceptibly, and Monroe sighed. Enough, the bell for class will ring soon, and you should all go there. Hurry up. She stressed that the crowd dispersed. Cowards, anyway, it's good to hide behind a girl's ass. Flying Man had enough and rushed into the classroom. You don't mind if I saved you, do you? Gwen asked Peter if it was a secret. She liked him and wanted them to date, but her presence protected him from lightning. My friend is a villain, what bothers me? Gwen smiled, and Peter smelled a new perfume she must have been trying because she smelled good. Come on, let's go to class first. Then the class bell rang. The final year of school was really long. Peter's coursework was all completed ahead of schedule. His exam preparation was completed. Application forms were sent to every major college and university he could think of, and now he was a business owner. The transaction at the warehouse has been completed and signed, and he only has to wait for his check to be cashed and the official documents. Once that does, he can start cleaning up the place and has begun scouring the internet for designs based on scrap containers and prefabricated offices. This is the future, and now he still wants to finish school, leave his life and start his own internship. Gwen passed her birthday early because her birthday meant she turned 18. There are so many things to do now, it looks as if he is stretching himself, and more importantly his finances, getting thinner. Peter was pulled out of his thoughts by another of his classmates who punched him by the arm. The vice captain of the math team, Felicia Hardy, sat next to him. Pete, I know you may be happy to finish this year, but some of us still have work to do. We also have a triathlon and I wonder if you're going to spit out your gut before the race. You didn't train last week. Felicia was not the most socially personable person he knew, and she complained bluntly about her own grievances. When Felicia leaned against him, he smelled the scent of Gwen's body. It was a faint sweetness on his nose, and he hadn't thought of Felicia before, and when she leaned against him, he had a hard time concentrating. Felicia developed very early and was not as ordinary as many girls. They went up and down as she spoke to him, and Peter wished she had more awareness of his influence. Her long hair hung down, her back was tied up, and her hair was almost silver. Yes, Felicia, I will go, I promise. Wait, aren't you also sick at Oz? Felicia grimaced. Yes, but I don't need to be in bed like a little fool for a week. Peter just shook his head, yes, as witty as ever. As she leaned against the table to lecture him, he tried not to look down, and looking so closely, he clearly saw what color her bra really was and how appropriate it was, even though she didn't seem to know. Pete, no matter what happens at Oz, you can't possibly ruin my future. If you're still sick or climbing a wall or something, quit the club and let me find someone more reliable. Peter shook his head. Felicia, I'm fine, so no need to climb walls. Listen and stop mentioning my case, okay? Felicia turned her back in surprise. We don't need fools, Pete. Oh wait, what's the perfume you're using, because, it's nice. Felicia shook her head. Dumb Pete, dumb Pete. Standing up and leaving Peter, he could only watch her walk away. What did I say? He mused. Flipping his phone over, his plan for the warehouse is now a secret. Not that he will tell someone like Felicia that she is an acquaintance, not a friend. He bookmarked the instructions and floor plans of the container houses on bookmarks in each place, often used in places that suffered disasters or large quantities of homeless things. But for Peter, these were gold waiting to be mined, and he would keep the money in the bank. Closing his browser, he mused the rest of his lunch. However, Felicia made a good point, and with the midterm just around the corner and the club seeing their every move in the season, would he have time to clean up the warehouse and make repairs without help? He doesn't know anyone, the only muscles he knows that will help move and renovate will be lightning, and he'd rather learn to sing and teach raccoons to do housework than ask him to do anything. Even Harry couldn't help much, he would hire contractors, and Peter would come up with hundreds of thousands of dollars for them to see the place. No, he needs to make time for this, he needs to take control of his life once and for all. He has new abilities, although the work should be managed by himself. He had to be careful not to attract too much attention, and a skinny child carrying piles of wood or bags of concrete looked strange. He has amazing power, but he needs to be careful not to draw attention to himself. Peter went bankrupt, and when he paid taxes, real estate agent fees, and a whole bunch of things he didn't know about to buy a warehouse, he had less than $20,000 left with Osborne's money. While this may sound like a lot to others, when he pays for materials and supplies to complete the work in warehouses and workshops, he will be completely bankrupt. When he started buying the bare minimum tools he needed to clean up his warehouse, he realized that getting $50,000 was a scam, and that internal maintenance needed to do so that the warehouse could be clean, not to mention habitable. He needs a job and has to pay a good salary. Peter had intended to risk living in his new house for a while, but he never spent time on it because there was no proper place. After walking for about 10 minutes, he discovered what he had spotted earlier. The area is clean and has many semi-industrial warehouse areas. They had plenty of truckers and amenities, as well as a lot of prostitutes, but that wasn't what Peter was looking for. Many of these places require temporary workers, and a large amount of goods to be brought in requires an extra pair of hands to pay in cash and then be forgotten. He only earns a few $100s a week, drags boxes or sweeps floors. If he's cornered, or has an emergency, he can look for something temporary, but what he really needs is a steady income. He found an advertisement for a full-time position in the window of 7-Eleven near the warehouse. It wouldn't have been perfect, but it met his wishes. Good paychecks, flexible hours, and cleaning up a downtown Brooklyn junkyard are great ways to get something that might be less than legal electronics or end-of-life computer parts. The dump is huge, and piles of waste trucks have been made into a maze. But from the ground, it's even more magnificent. With an advertisement in hand, he walked over from the entrance, under the big yellow and black sign that read Alexi's car and machinery scrap. The sign that we buy anything old or bad caught Peter's attention. Now he's not just here to look for a job, but to find useful machines for his startup company. When he walked to the office, he saw a bearded man preparing to open the top of a huge steel workbench that looked like a server rack, and he raised his eyebrows. Peter shouted as he ran towards him. Hey you, wait, stop, no. The thick accented headphones that the man was wearing must have blocked out all the noise, or he had neglected that it was a child for him, but Peter grabbed the iron bar from his hand. Hey, wait. When the man reached out to pick up a sledgehammer, Peter raised his hand in defense. What the are you doing? The man waved his hammer at Peter and said dejectedly. Hey boss, we caught a thief. Hey, no. You're about to make a big mistake, I can explain. Peter raised the iron bar and retreated far away, and if the man swung the stick would not only miss the hand, but also swing it over his neck. With an iron bar in his hand, of course, Peter was ready to ensure his safety, and when he was nervous, he felt another person coming out of the office in front of the door. A small, athletic, balding man walked out of the office and wiped his hands with a rag that was already dirty. Come on, Benz, it's a child. What are you doing? Go back to work, you can get out of the way. This person has little patience after being harassed. Wait, sir, server chassis. The employee was about to knock it open with an iron bar. The bald man shrugged. So what? Well, this is an Osborne Azura server case with anti-theft equipment inside. If it cracks or is damaged, they signal and then destroy the drive so that it can no longer be used. Even the scrapped ones have a small backup battery in case they are stolen. The man said with a frown. Is that so? Well, yes, I've done some work before, plus the machine's specs leaked online a few years ago, which is why the OS company abandoned them. Mark II was tethered to the machine room in Osterps. Peter began to explain, but the old man interrupted him. Yes, kid, I don't care. Can you fix it? He waved the rag at the advertisement in Peter's hand, realizing that he was giving Peter a chance to prove himself, and nodded. Peter crumpled up the job application. Yes, I can, but can you please not hit me with a hammer like I did? Yes, Benny is only interested in this machine, you must have scared him. Benny nodded and put on his headphones. So, sir. Peter Parker. Peter held out his hand, but the man just looked at it, his own hand greasy. Alexi. Parker, do you need anything? Looking at the workbench, he found the screwdriver he needed. No, as long as Mr. Benny doesn't mind me using his tools. Mr. Benny. Alexi smiled. No, it's just Benny, of course, go for it. Peter grabbed the flathead screwdriver, ran his fingers along the bottom of the box, found the screwlock he was looking for, inserted the head of the screwdriver into the screwdriver's label, and pushed it up. There was a loud bang, and on the side of the box, a panel slipped out. Peter was looking for a box knife. He reached out, slid the knife between the panel and the server case, and gently ripped the knife away until it jumped out of a thin wire. Oh, it's okay. Peter grabbed a pair of scissors with one hand, and when holding the panel in the other, reached into the open box, and the 3 scissors put the panel back. In the front of the server set-top box, he opens the first panel and pulls out the server blade. All done, he said as he passed the drive to Benny, who stuffed it into an anti-static bag. Once the boxes are empty, you can unscrew the top and bottom on both sides and take the transmitters out. Now they don't have power but are still usable. Peter wasn't stupid, he just committed a felony in front of someone who apparently didn't care much about this, because it was illegal to have an abandoned OS server. They are military-specific hardware, and you need a lot of licenses and other documents to handle them. If a junkyard in Brooklyn had something similar, he was the reincarnation of Jesus. Alexi nodded. Benny, while I'm chatting with Peter, my office is more personal to these kinds of things. Alexi led Peter into a crowded and cluttered office, which was more like a repairable item and paperwork pen than a conference area. But after he removed an old engine block from his seat, he motioned for Peter to sit down as he sat down in a large leather chair behind his desk. So, you want this job because it's yours. No fixed time, no fixed remuneration. You can get 10% of the sales price of any product you modify, and you can also be silent about what you care about. If you can, then get started and I'll pay you. Judging by the expression on his face, this is non-negotiable. No wonder no one wants this job. If he can fix a large thing, no problem. But the toaster and other trash would make him a lot of money. The ad was clearly a scam to get a few hours of work from a desperate person, and Peter was, even 10% wasn't enough. If I take it as a trade, I'll look for something for my company. He wanted Alexei to see the value of his skills. Oh yes. I don't know yet, but I own warehouses on 1st Street and Brook Street. Alexei snorted. Where Moss died. Hope you didn't pay too much for it. We cleaned up the site, the place was a mess. Peter had to agree, mostly about the state it was in, and definitely not about that person's definition of cleanliness. Yes, but it's okay, I just want little things. I see some of your portable offices still mounted on flat surfaces, how about those server chassis? Alexei snorted. You know, Peter, that's about $5,000 for a new product, and I have £5,000, and you're talking about a lot less work. Well, boss Alexei, no, these drives are all military equipment from the OS company, worth $50,000 each, and the tracking system I just interrupted would get the FBI and a bunch of police officers here. If they are started, there are 10 drives there, so it's 500,000. Quote. Is that so? Alexei stopped and waved his hand. Okay, I see, okay, take it. You kill me here, kill me. Are you going to send it over? Peter looked a little guilty, nodded and said. All right. Quote. But you'd better be worth it. Hey Benny, prepare the apartment for that kid, there are 5 in the back. 4. Benny shouted. It seems like one is being used, so 4 is okay. Peter nodded. Okay, let's go now, come back tomorrow, we'll help you get started. I have a couple of little things for you to try, you know, more kid talking, we don't bite here. Alexei said with a smile. Alexei opened a drawer, took out a stack of bills, counted 10 bills, and tapped on the table he handed to Peter. He looked at the man who gave him $1,000. Advance payment, as you know, a person's mistake. But you'd better come tomorrow, or, He looked at Peter. Peter smiled and nodded, and Alexei raised his eyebrows. Yes, thanks, boss. Alexei just shook his head. When they reached an agreement, Peter was stunned. He had just entered 4 offices, not just his own home, but also the workshop, and $1,000. It was a start, and once he cleared the warehouse, he could let a few tenants in. This is his backup plan in case his business fails. Checking out his own home's plans led him to the idea. He had 4 containers and some minor bullet damage to the office. When he rents out the others, the extra office will give him space to work. They are less fussy and he can charge for a room that basically has amenities. Although there is less hassle in construction, he still earns a large sum of money every month, he only needs to move the house to the office to make it attractive. Alexei watched his newest employee, Peter Parker, wander through a pile of garbage, stopping every now and then to check on something that was sure to be valuable to him. Recalling the child's words, Alexei reached into a drawer and took out a large handful of money and hid it under some papers. Hi Benny, come over and please. Peter was picking up his spirits while he was in school. First, he cleaned for hours, bagging up most of the garbage. Then found the right thing in the warehouse and looked cleaner. Secondly, with the delivery of 4 portable offices, he could get some flooring and actually build a basic workshop in the warehouse. Without noticing, he kept searching the web for the design of the container house, not realizing where he was going. Rushing behind Lightning, his phone flew. Of course, Lightning turned around angrily and prepared to hit the stupid man. Parker. He growled, not missing an opportunity to beat him up. Peter's eyes widened, and his fists flashed, seemingly moving in slow motion. It was clear where the lightning would hit, and Peter felt that he could leave the road without much effort. Crouched on the ground, as if to reach for his phone, Lightning missed his swing and pulled back the other, realizing that Parker had gone into hiding and turned to the upper hook. Flying Man's punch accelerates the attack on Peter's exposed face, but for Peter, Flying Man may also move underwater. Peter smiled to himself and made a plan. Peter rolled back with his heels, avoiding the lightning blow. Flying Man's temper rose, and with a growl, he stood up and kicked Peter in the abdomen. When Peter seemed to slide over, he let out a disgusting crunch and his foot fell off the road. When Flying Man's foot hit the bracket of the concrete wall, he roared in pain and grabbed his foot and fell. The force of the kick twisted it into an abnormal angle, the crunch of his own bones, and when Lightning saw the injuries and pain begin to radiate from it, he began to feel nauseous, and before he passed out, a stream of vomit flowed from his lips. What the hell is going on here? Mrs. Donaldson shouted as the students quickly hid the phone they were using to record the fight. Of course, a Flying Man's cronies, Peter couldn't even remember his name, blowing his horn and saying, "Parker's hand first." Peter found himself being dragged to the principal's office. He sat there for hours when an ambulance arrived and Flyer was taken to the hospital. A uniformed policeman arrived, but after watching the cell phone footage, he shook his head and left. Peter wondered if it was because he was angry at wasting his time. Peter knew that feeling as he sat there waiting. Finally, despite Flying Man's father, Jack Thompson, walking into the office and yelling, his face was red, possibly a symptom of congestive heart failure. Peter thought before yelling at the boy, he looked old, and the tight-fitting suit and tie didn't hide the man's nasty stench. Peter could smell the liquor in his breath and the faint scent of lipstick. He had never overrated Jack, and a man who made his son do like a Flying Man was just as bad. Now, he is proving Peter. "You little fool, I'm going to sue you. My son broke his ankle, he will miss the final, you ruined his career." Peter had heard enough, stood up straight. Go, I'll stand in front of the judge and tell them. The thing about bullying, about previous attacks, about all the complaints my aunt has made, and about how I seem to have hurt Flying Man on the floor. I, 5 feet 7 inches tall, injured Flyer, a high school football player. Peter took a step forward. So yes, sue me. Go see how good you are. Peter's anger was palpable, and even Jack took a step back, his anger drowned out by the boy in front of him. Of course, people like Jack Thompson just moved the target, and if the boy wasn't scared, the headmaster would. I want him to be expelled for fighting. He cost you the season finale, and the Flyer will be eliminated for at least 6 months. Do something. He shouted. Mr. Parker, while I can't expel you because I have to expel Mr. Thompson, I do feel that this behavior is not appropriate for a farewell speech at school. It might be better if Stacy took your place, don't you think? The headmaster stammered. Peter's face turned pale, and losing his highest position would have hurt him in many different ways. That's it. You idiot, get this little fool out. Jack shouted. Well, Mr. Thompson, as I said, I also had to fire your son. But removing Peter's name from the list of commencement speeches did prevent him from securing several scholarships. I can add that some scholarships are the only way Peter can go to college. The headmaster whispered something in Jack's ear, but Peter heard him because he was right. The conditional scholarships he received were offered only to outstanding students, disrupting not only his college plans, but also his own. Jack shrugged away from the principal's arm. All right. Quote. Jack Thompson looked at Peter. Hey, wait, you're the kid who vomited in the lab, right? He smiled, took out the phone, and dialed a number. Yes, Jack, I think you have an internship for Peter Parker. Yes, good. In any case, Hammer wouldn't care, just a loser. He smiled at Peter, who subconsciously bit his hand, and he ended the call with a smile. Nice to see you again, playing golf on Sunday. The principal shook hands with him and said. Of course. It was as if ending a child's career and ruining his life, and it was another normal Monday for him. Oh, Jack, how long do you say Flying Man will stay in the hospital? About a week, then he will need to have surgery, so maybe 4 weeks. Ah, not good. Peter, you've been suspended from school for 4 weeks, and if Flyer is going to take a break from school, then I don't understand why you're going to school. I'll ask Gladys to send a letter to your aunt, and I'm sure she'll say that to you too. The headmaster gestured to the door and dismissed Peter while Jack stayed. No doubt he wanted to see what else they could do to make a mess of Peter's life, and when he left, he tried to avoid closing the door. As he walked through the hallway, Peter swore in his heart, fool. Not only did they take away his future, but they also missed 4 weeks of classes, and he would miss the study time for mock exams and midterms. For those exams he needed for scholarship opportunities, $2.5 million barely had what he needed. Peter grabbed his bag from his locker and rushed out of the school, ignoring Gwen's loud shouts about helping him with problems he would have missed. He was so angry that he didn't want to talk to anyone. He was so angry that he didn't pay attention to anyone but that Jack Thompson. Peter was ready for his exams, but the school provided more materials that only teachers could get. Peter is well aware that this is not a student like him, but stupid like Flyer, and those stupid guys don't get decent grades without cheating. The problem, however, is that his attendance has dropped and his average test score has dropped because of missing them. In the end, his chances of getting a high score on his final exam dropped. Just before the exam, he missed 4 weeks of study, which was a nightmare. Since the suspension had already left a stain on his record, he was punished even more for that fool's temper. As Jack Thompson walks through the halls of the school, he is complacent that maybe he doesn't get what he wants, but ruins the life of that little fool. If his ankle doesn't heal, then his football career is over. As he walked through the parking lot, he hit his car's fob, frowning as the normal chirping was distorted out. He was so angry when he heard the news of lightning that he parked his car in front of the school, ignoring the no parking sign. Because there is no camera, so why should he care? Jack stared blankly at his car, and in shock, he put down his briefcase. Someone vandalized his car. No, someone knocked a no parking sign from the roof into the driver's seat. The wheels were bent at an angle, and all 4 tires were cut. Not only cut, but there were also large grooves in the tire wall. He was stunned and just stood there, not knowing how to report. While Peter knew that Jack couldn't and wouldn't say anything, his casual violence toward the car did make him feel better. He made sure no one saw him and smashed the car into pieces. This self-righteous attitude continued until he arrived home, and an angry May was waiting for him. Well, fight. I told you, it's not the same as you, Peter. She went crazy, glaring at him and standing with her hands crossed. Aunt May, to be honest, I didn't. Fixia's dad screwed this up. After he explained everything, perhaps calming down, he even smiled when he explained how lightning had injured his ankle. He explained that without the graduate representative position and a 4-week suspension, the scholarship he applied for would have failed. When Peter finished speaking, May reached for the phone, and Peter interrupted her, shook his head and said, Aunt May, you can't do anything. Fixia's dad worked at the OS company. I lost, even with photos and evidence of my innocence, I still lost. A frustrated Peter couldn't help himself tell her that he had spent almost all of his $2.5 million. It's best to wait until the warehouse actually looks like a startup and not a war zone. No, but I can still call the school board. Now twice Lightning Thompson bullied you. I don't care if his father is a board member or if he's rich. Peter, I have to do something. He patted her shoulder and she sat at their table, in a messy mood. Don't worry Aunt May, it'll be fine. I know it probably won't let things go, but that's okay. I have a job, I have a plan, everything will be fine, I promise. Even if it doesn't help, he has different ways to take revenge on Jack and the headmaster. It's not just car road signs, a person who makes a broken ankle look too light. Peter decides that if Flying Thompson dares to make another move on him, he will make sure that Flying Man gets what he deserves. If his life is ruined, why not make a mess of Flying Man's life, make him feel what he has been through, and let him know what hell is like. The aunt stared at Peter, the frown on his face and the anger that then spread. Hey, Peter, it's okay, you'll be fine. She reached out and patted his hand gently, holding it in her own and rubbing it with her fingers. Peter shook his head. Yes, I'm sorry, Aunt May, I'm sorry, just angry, I thought. As he leaned against her, holding her hand with his other hand, he realized that what he wanted to do was far worse than crashing a car. He needs control, he needs to regain control, not only his life, but also his anger. Before things got out of hand, he didn't just hit a car. When Fixia was in the hospital, he took a lot of painkillers. Peter cleaned and crushed all the trash at the dump and also sent in a lot of dubious whitewashing. Peter knew it had been stolen, but after repairing half a dozen refrigerators and a large LCD TV, he managed to get his hands on several large buckets of things to paint the entire floor. He had to get the extra money back, but for now, he didn't care. He even discovered a new power. Recalling when he strained on a cement column, his skin bubbling with black, sticky liquid, and wearing smooth tights from head to toe. He felt his muscles overwhelmed by the hidden power while the pillar fell effortlessly from the ground. When he crashed into Jack Thompson's car, he heard an echo in his heart. We are strong, we are Venom. Being bitten by a spider must have made him feel a little strange, but Venom was cool and he loved the sound. Recalling how he felt, the way he wanted revenge on the fools who ruined his life, he found that skin would squeeze out of his pores. Pausing for 2 weeks, he no longer needed anger or hatred, which now seemed to be a conditioned reflex in response to his wishes. Not only that, but when he lashed out in the car, his fingers turned into thick paws, and when he happily tore the tires, he did not hesitate to pass through the rubber. The warehouses were 100 meters each, and at night he knew that only the most diligent security guards would be nearby, so he dropped every container and put them on a wall. He then spread the paint with a giant floor brush, opened all the windows, and let it dry. A few days later, he made the other side and slightly convinced Alexei that he made him give up some of the inflated insulating spray. He had to pay for the sprayer and mask in full without compromise. Alexei got his eyes right this time, it was just rented. But Alexei refused to budge because he needed it and could leave it behind. Peter knew he was generous because Benny had decided to leave. His mom was sick in Seattle, and he went to care for her, leaving Peter to cover up his job and his own. Once Alexei demonstrated his expertise in more than just mechanical and electrical repairs, though, he got everything from appliances to cell phones fixed. Peter also benefited from the deal, and there were many industrial machines around Alexei, which Peter borrowed temporarily. This allowed him to not only weld the doors of the Great Bay, but also strengthen the building itself and further isolate it. He got a welder and an arc cutter, and had already made plans to build houses out of storage containers. His plan is slowly taking shape. A new trend of living in warehouses is on the rise, and no one wants to pay less for an apartment made of containers. If it's warm, dry, has the amenities of a regular place, and cheapest is that Peter can invite a few tenants into the warehouse. Stay in the office and make some money on your own. He doesn't need scholarships as much as he used to, as long as his ideas are met. He soon had 2 hollow boxes 20 meters long and 20 meters wide in the warehouse, each occupying a corner. He planned to make a small garden between them with plastic sheeting and a raised platform. He will make sure that watering it can handle any mold problems and does not die in winter, which will add a little homely to the warehouse's monotonous white and gray interior. He would eventually paint, but for now, white is clean and, more importantly, free. The plan came to his mind, it was the easiest. His abilities are slowly growing, and he doesn't even plan to venture hunting until he knows he won't fall and die on the first night, nor will he be killed by a lucky knife. After a fight with Flying Man, he convinces Aunt May to let him go to a self-defense class. Classes are slow, of course slow. No one wants a bunch of kids and old ladies to become MMA warriors overnight, and he has to control his impatience. Slow and steady, like his abilities, he could not force classes, even if he could afford them. Back in their apartment, Aunt May is taking time to adjust to Peter getting out of the house instead of coming home. She knew he was working, but every night it was almost midnight before he walked in. He was exhausted and smelled work. Before devouring her home-cooked food and going to bed, make a basic greeting. Most of the time he left before she got up, happy to see him working, but at the same time worried that he didn't rest. She put her hands on the kitchen table and was going to intervene. Although Peter might take it against her this time, she was worried. Pick up the phone number. She took out of Peter's phone. Yes, hello, I'm Maypac, Peter's aunt, can I talk to Gwen? Giving Peter's address to Gwen looked like a cheat at best. She went online to check the dump where he works. It was fine to fix old appliances. Ben had started fixing children's bikes before moving to the auto mechanic, and she thought your job was fine. Although the warehouses he visited were mostly worrisome, the news reports about the shootouts and subsequent medical lab discoveries were not a pleasant image. If the dump cleanup was present, she knew he was probably delivering garbage, not cleaning up the blood. Still, Gwen was a sensible young woman who trusted her Peter, even if Peter didn't know he needed it. After making the call, Gwen stared at the address May gave her. Even if she couldn't recognize the address, she could recognize the building. There's a lot of coverage in the news, and like Brooklyn, a shooting is big news. She immediately called a taxi and headed towards the industrial area, wondering if Peter was okay. She was shocked when she found the address. The people here did a great job. Most buildings have the usual dust and street dust that blackens the walls. But this one is clean, all the windows are unsealed, and they glow when the light reflects off their freshly repaired or newly installed anti-glass color. After the horror story of the news, she was glad that if Peter was inside, it wasn't as bad as everyone said. The chain fence around the house has been repaired, and the gate is swinging on a freshly oiled hinge. The road leading to the main gate has been weeded, the explosion has been cleaned, and small fragments of concrete have been filled and evenly paved. It's not Peter's job, someone is renovating the property for sale and Peter is probably helping them. However, the new electrodes around this huge loading area with closed hatches confused her. Why weld bay would close if it were to be sold, but how the new paint on the door was wet, and the huge new iron bar lock hinted at what she would find inside. Gwen knew she shouldn't just break into a strange building, so she knocked on the door before noticing a buzzer, and the walkie-talkie sounded like Peter's. Hello. Sounds good. Yes, Peter, I'm Gwen, can I come in? It sounded as if he had fallen off something, in one. Of course, of course. There were many rings ahead, and when the lock was opened, the buzzer sounded. The contents surprised her. 2 huge box apartments sit on one side, repainted with dark blue with white corrugated plastic roofs. Not needed in the warehouse, but added to the aesthetics. In the middle of them has been turned a white-tipped fence, lined with clods, waiting for seeds. At the time of the unfinished, each box house had a path, and Peter had begun spraying marking lines in the foreyard. The piles of scrap were still on the letters, so she guessed he wasn't done yet. What the romance is this? I thought it was a crime scene, not a trendy farm. You can explain it now, Mr. Peter. Quote. Gwen pretended to be angry, but she still wondered if making Peter think she was crazy was the quickest way to get the right answer. Oh hi Gwen. He just said. Don't you say hello to me. Peter, what is this, apartment? Are you now helping to build an apartment in the old warehouse? No. He replied. Well, this is Gwen. Peter pulled out a folding chair he had picked up, and Gwen sat down and began to explain. Listening to Peter's conversation, her own anger slowly overtook her curiosity about what he was doing. Harry also did not return to school, and even after several attempts to contact him, he did not return his calls or any text messages. As soon as Peter left school, Gwen had no idea what had happened. In addition to being suspended, he received a text message from Hammer rejecting him, citing misconduct that led him to cancel his internship. Peter was indeed out of luck this time, but when he started next time, her eyes started to twinkle. So, yes, the warehouse is mine, but please don't tell May. I spent all my college money on that, but, you see, there are 2 apartments, and I have my own house. I put some solar panels on the roof so there was no electricity. That's awesome, Peter. Gwen was in awe. Peter showed her the interior of one of the boxes. It was huge, and he must have just drawn the layout of the floor. I want one. She said right away. Not negotiable. Gwen, I really need that money that you know, and I don't think it's right to charge you. Nope. She pushed his shoulders. Proper landlord, lease, I want one. MJ and I were talking about buying our own house, but this, it's amazing, Peter. Peter smiled, in the back of his head. Yes, but most of the plans come from the internet, Mr. Alexei does. Alexei Setvich. Gwen interrupted him and said. My dad has inches thick papers, Peter, he's a liar. Peter looked at Gwen who was pulling his face aside. But yes, you already know, right? She asked. Gwen, this is a job, and I swear I won't do anything illegal. I just can't tell May, please, Gwen you can't tell her either. Gwen smiled viciously at him. Very well, Peter, you just have to do a little thing for me. She took a deep breath and took the risk to finally admit her true feelings for him. Anything, anything. Look directly into his eyes. Good, now let's date. Of course, Peter was okay with Gwen's attempts at extortion. He had liked her ever since they started school together. But he didn't have the courage to say anything, and her father was a little scared every time he saw him. Of course, when they stared at each other awkwardly for a moment, Peter's brain grabbed his mouth. Well, if you're my girlfriend. Without even asking, he moved and gently touched her with his lips. Gwen was shocked. Will he admit that he likes me? Peter had just kissed her, not a strong and overbearing kiss, but a gentle kiss to test the waters, and she didn't mind. Peter is not a two-dimensional learning robot, and even under this anxiety, he has secrets and flaws. Her mind froze when she glanced down to make sure Peter's hand was kept at an acceptable level. She noticed something different about him. Oh my god. She thought, Peter is packing. But her cheeks began to redden. She never dated and also learned from her dad that boys are scum. It was as new to her as it was to Peter, but there were limits to her. She turned to hide her embarrassment. Yes, that's good, Peter, good. We started less than a minute. Peter, clean, you stink. Quote. Peter sniffed himself and noticed that his clothes were covered with dust and dirt, and he did smell a little. Peter hurried past a bucket of cold, clean water, grabbing Parker as he muttered to himself. His heart was beating in his chest all the time, and when he kissed, Gwen's fragrance and her perfume shot straight into his brain. He soaked himself in cold water, thankful for those tiny droplets that cooled not only his body, but also his desires. The bucket was in his possession, and although there were water pipes, most of the facilities were destroyed and on his to-do list. Gwen stared, no doubt she was blushing. He pulled a clean t-shirt out of the pile and sprayed himself with the most harmless deodorant he could find. He smiled when he realized Gwen was looking at him. Gwen became interested in his apartment plans, like an excited puppy. That's when Peter's social anxiety disappeared at first, which Gwen herself admits was cute. Floor plans, circuit diagrams, and decorative samples all fly around in a continuous schedule and plan. Gwen started out a little overwhelmed because Peter had a lot of planning and her only plan was to graduate with high grades. Unfortunately, due to the interference of the flying man, she took Peter's place to give a farewell speech, and then spent the whole summer looking for a place to live. All she has to do now is tell her dad and MJ that Peter and MJ have a strange relationship. They grew up living next door, and Peter lost contact with his aunt when they moved, and when they regained contact, lightning warned him to leave. Fixia and MJ used to go to junior high school and have been dating since then. Although she never liked him, although MJ and she were best friends. She could see the worry on her face, and she knew that lightning didn't make things any easier for her when her family life was bad. She had tried to get MJ to open up and even invited her to go out with Felicia. But she either never came, or watched in frustration as they had a good time. Her dad was something else. He had no problem with Peter before, he was just another smart kid, but as Gwen got older, his opinion changed. Although Peter was quiet and polite when they met. But he always looked at him suspiciously, as if Gwen would suddenly announce her pregnancy one day, and it was all Peter's fault. Thanks for watching.